There are moments in Hollywood that cut straight through the carefully constructed glamour and reveal something achingly real underneath. What happened when Christina Applegate and Ed O'Neill reunited recently was one of those moments. Because when Christina finally opened her mouth and started talking about the man who played her television father for 11 years, what came out was not a polished press release or rehearsed soundbite. It was raw, unfiltered truth. And the entertainment world has not quite recovered since. For years, fans of Married with Children assumed they knew the full story. They thought they understood what that show was, what those relationships were, and what happened when the cameras stopped rolling. They were wrong. What Christina Applegate has now exposed about Ed O'Neill goes so much deeper than anything previously reported. It rewrites the narrative entirely, and once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. The catalyst of these revelations was a reunion appearance that brought the surviving cast of Married with Children back into the same orbit for the first time in years. These events tend to be carefully managed affairs, full of nostalgic laughter and safe, crowd-pleasing anecdotes. Nobody rocks the boat. Everyone smiles for the cameras. But Christina Applegate has never been particularly good at performing contentment she does not feel, and she has reached a point in her life where pretending simply costs too much energy she cannot afford to spend. When she and Ed O'Neill stood together again, something shifted. The dynamic between them was immediately visible to everyone in the room. This was not two former colleagues exchanging pleasantries. This was something far older and far more complicated. The body language told the story before a single word was spoken. And then Christina started speaking, and the room went very quiet. She began carefully, the way people do when they are about to say something they have been holding for a very long time. She talked about what it was like being 15 years old on that set. She talked about the industry she had walked into before she was old enough to fully understand what it was. And then she looked at Ed O'Neill and said something that nobody in that room expected. She said that for years she had protected him by not telling the full story of what their relationship actually involved. And now she was done protecting anyone, including herself. The story Christina proceeded to tell was not a scandal in the way tabloid culture defines that word. There was no wrongdoing. There was no betrayal. What there was, however, was a level of emotional complexity and personal sacrifice that the public had never been allowed to see. And the fact that it had remained hidden for nearly 4 decades says everything about how Hollywood trains people, especially women, to keep quiet about their own experiences. Christina revealed that the dynamic between her and Ed O'Neill during the filming of Married with Children was far more emotionally layered than anyone knew. Ed had taken on a protective role with her almost immediately, and that role came with weight that neither of them ever discussed publicly. He made decisions on her behalf. He intervened in situations she was not even always aware of at the time. He managed relationships between her and producers, between her and the press, between her and the more difficult aspects of playing a teenage sex symbol on national television, while actually being a teenager. What Christina exposed was the extent to which she only learned the full picture years later, as an adult, and particularly in the years following her multiple sclerosis diagnosis in 2021. She began having more honest conversations with people from that era of her life. She began asking questions she had never thought to ask before. And the answers she received about what Ed O'Neill had done behind the scenes, quietly and without ever seeking credit, stopped her cold. There were conversations he had with network executives that she was never told about. There were moments where he drew lines in the sand on her behalf, quietly and effectively, without making a scene or putting her in the uncomfortable position of having to fight those battles herself. There were times when people in positions of power had ideas about how to use Christina's image and her growing popularity that Ed found unacceptable, and he made that known in ways that protected her without embarrassing her. She found out about these things gradually, through conversations with crew members and producers who had been there and who, decades later, felt free to speak honestly. And each revelation landed with the force of something long overdue. The man had been running interference for her in rooms she was never invited into for reasons she was never given, because he had decided that protecting her was simply part of his responsibility as the senior figure on that set. What makes Christina's exposure of Ed O'Neill so powerful is precisely that it is not an accusation. It is the opposite. It is a reckoning with gratitude that she had never fully been able to express because she had not known the full scope of what he'd done. And there's something devastating about realizing, decades later, how much someone did for you that you never had the chance to properly acknowledge. She talked at the reunion about what it cost Ed to be that person on set. He was not just an actor doing his job and going home. He was carrying responsibility for another human being's well-being in an environment that was not designed to prioritize that kind of care. Hollywood sets, particularly in the late 80s and 90s, were not known for their sensitivity to the emotional needs of young performers. The industry operated differently then. There were fewer protections. There were more pressures. And there were significantly more ways for a young woman's trajectory to be derailed before she even understood what was happening to her. Ed absorbed some of that pressure. So Christina did not have to. He paid a social cost for it, in terms of relationships with certain producers and executives who found his protectiveness inconvenient. He chose her well-being over those relationships repeatedly, and he never once mentioned it to her. He just kept showing up, kept doing it, and kept his mouth shut about the effort required. Christina wept when she talked about this. Not the polished, camera-ready tears of a practiced public figure. Real, messy, complicated grief and gratitude mixed together in a way that made everyone watching understand they were witnessing something genuine. She said that she had wasted so many years not knowing what it had done for her, and that felt like a loss she was still processing. It is impossible to understand why Christina is speaking this openly now without understanding what her MS diagnosis did to her relationship with silence. When she went public in August 2021 with the news that she had been living with multiple sclerosis, something fundamental changed in how she approached her own story. Illness as a way of burning away the things that no longer seemed worth preserving, and one of the things Christina stopped preserving was careful discretion about her own experiences. She has spoken in various interviews about how the diagnosis forced a reckoning with authenticity. When your body is staging a revolt that you cannot control, the idea of carefully managing other people's perception starts to seem like an extraordinary waste of whatever energy you have left. She started saying things she had previously kept to herself. She started naming experiences she had previously left unnamed. And she started having conversations with people from her past that she had been putting off for reasons that no longer made sense to her. Her podcast, Messy, which she co-hosts with fellow actress Jamie Lynn Sigler, who also lives with MS, became a space where this new willingness to be unguarded could breathe. The two women built something that explicitly valued honesty over image management, and that practice of public honesty spilled into other areas of Christina's life. By the time she stood at that reunion and started talking about Ed O'Neill, she had been in training for this kind of truth-telling for several years. The MS also transformed her understanding of what Ed had done for her back on that set. When you are living with a condition that requires other people to sometimes step up and carry things you cannot carry yourself, you develop a very different appreciation for what that kind of support actually costs and what it actually means. Christina said as much directly. She said that living with illness had taught her to see Ed's choices with completely new eyes. According to Christina's account, when she began to piece together the full picture of what Ed had done on her behalf during the married with children years, she eventually confronted him about it. Not with anger, but with a specific kind of direct honesty that their relationship had earned over nearly 4 decades. His response, as she described it, was entirely characteristic of the man. He did not make a big moment of it. He did not turn it into a scene about himself or his choices or his reasons. He simply confirmed what she had found out, acknowledged that yes, he had done those things, and then redirected the conversation toward her. He asked how she was doing. He asked about her health. He moved on in the way of someone who genuinely does not consider themselves owed any particular recognition for doing what they viewed as the obvious right thing. Christina said that response broke her heart a little, in the best possible way, because it confirmed that everything he had done had been done without any expectation of acknowledgement or gratitude. He had not been keeping a ledger. He had not been waiting for a moment when she would realize what he had sacrificed. He had simply done it because it needed doing, and then he had kept moving. That is the thing she said she most wanted people to understand about Ed O'Neill. Not the public image of Al Bundy, the slovenly shoe salesman with a miserable family. Not the later image of Jay Pritchett from Modern Family, the wealthy patriarch with the comic pomposity. The real Ed O'Neill is a man who spent 11 years quietly making sure a teenage girl became an adult with her dignity intact, and who never once felt the need to talk about it. Christina was careful but deliberate in the reunion conversation about placing Ed's choices in their proper context. She was not telling the story in a vacuum. She was telling it against the backdrop of everything the entertainment industry has reckoned with in recent years about how young performers, particularly young women, were treated during the era when she was coming up. The conversation sparked by the broader cultural movement around accountability in Hollywood had given her a new framework for understanding her own history. She said plainly that she was lucky. She was lucky that the senior figure on her set was Ed O'Neill and not someone else. She was lucky that the person who took it upon himself to watch out for her was a man of genuine integrity, rather than someone who would have used that proximity to her for his own purposes. She knows, and she said as much openly, that not everyone from her generation of young performers was that lucky. Some of them had very different experiences with the senior figures who were supposed to be looking out for them. This is part why she is telling the story now. Not to congratulate Ed O'Neill, though her love for him is obvious and her gratitude is profound, but to be specific about what it looked like when someone actually did it right. What does genuine protection of a young performer actually look like in practice? What choices does it require? What does it cost? Ed O'Neill's behavior during those 11 years is a case study in those questions, and Christina believes that case study deserves to be part of the public record. The reunion that prompted all this honesty has changed how people understand Married with Children. The show has always been remembered for its transgressive humor, its gleeful bad taste, its willingness to make a joke out of everything that polite society preferred not to discuss out loud. It holds a specific place in television history as a show that refused to be respectable and was wildly popular because of that refusal. But what Christina has exposed suggests that beneath all that cultivated chaos, there was a set held together by something unexpectedly solid. The relationships that made the comedy work were real relationships. The family that audiences laughed at was, in ways the audience never saw, an actual family. And the person most responsible for making that true was the man at the center of it, who played the worst husband and father on television while being, by Christina's account, one of the best mentors and protectors she has ever encountered. She said at the reunion that she spent years thinking the show was a thing they made together. She now understands that the show was just a context. What they actually made together was something harder to define and infinitely more valuable. They made a relationship that has survived the end of the show, the passage of decades, a devastating health diagnosis, and a particular erosion that Hollywood tends to visit on the connections formed within it. Perhaps the most striking moment of the entire reunion, and the one that has stayed with people who were there, came near the end of Christina's remarks. After everything she had said, after all the revelations and the tears and the gratitude expressed with directness that left no room for misunderstanding, she turned to Ed O'Neill and said something simple. She said she was sorry it took her this long to say all of it out loud. She said she wished she had known sooner, so she could have thanked him properly while she had more capacity for the kind of grand gestures she can no longer easily make. And she said that whatever time she has left, in whatever form her health allows her to exist in public, she intends to spend some portion of it making sure people know what Ed O'Neill actually is, as opposed to what his most famous character led them to believe. Ed's response, again, was brief and characteristic. He told her to stop apologizing for things that did not require apologies. He told her the only thing he needed from her was to keep doing what she was doing, which was facing everything in front of her with the same stubbornness she had brought to every scene they ever shot together. And then, in very Al Bundy fashion, he made a joke that made everyone in the room laugh and cry at the same time. The question now is what this honesty changes, both for Christina and for how the public understands this unlikely friendship that has endured across nearly 4 decades and some of life's most serious challenges. For Christina, speaking these truths appears to have been its own form of relief. There is something visibly lighter about her when she talks about this chapter of her life now that she is no longer editing herself for the comfort of a narrative. She is living with progressive illness that has reshaped her daily existence in fundamental ways. She walks with a cane. She manages cognitive challenges that she has discussed publicly with remarkable lack of self-pity. She has had to renegotiate her relationship with an identity that was always tied to physicality she can no longer take for granted. In the middle of all that, having the full story of her formative years finally told, having the man who shaped so much of who she became finally properly acknowledged, seems to matter to her in ways that go beyond mere public record-keeping. It is a form of completing something, of closing a loop that had been open for too long. And for Ed O'Neill, who has remained typically quiet on all of this, while making clear through his presence and his choices that his commitment to Christina has not diminished with time, the exposure seems to have landed as exactly what it was. Not an intrusion, not an embarrassment, but a tribute from someone who loves him and finally found the words. Some bonds really are unbreakable, and sometimes it takes a reunion, a diagnosis, and a woman who has simply run out of reasons to stay quiet to prove it.